Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'd first like to introduce Rick Gerhart. Rick is our supervisor from the Cedar Run District and also the vice chairman of the Board of Supervisors.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. Good evening. On behalf of the Fauquier County Board of Supervisors, I'd like to welcome you to our third Community Conversations meeting titled Achieving Our Vision. I would also like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time this evening to come out and participate in this very important process. Thus far, Fauquier Community Conversations have revealed three major themes for implementing the county's longstanding vision for growth and development. One, managing growth and concentrated development, vibrant towns and villages. Two, expanding business and employment opportunities. And lastly, rural and open space preservation for a strong agricultural community. Tonight we need your help to identify action steps that the county can take to support each of these themes. In closing, I would like to thank Kimberly Fogel and her staff, especially Andrew Hopewell, for championing this progress on behalf of the county. Their efforts have produced meaningful results that will serve the county well into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. We're going to talk a little bit about what this is all about. A number of you have been here before, have participated in the last two work sessions that we have had, but please bear with us so that those of you who are new to this process, we're going to tell you a little bit about what it's about before we begin. Anyway, what is it about? It's about our future. It's about what we could be, what we should be, what we want to be. And it's up to us to make those decisions, to take those actions, to make Fauquier County what we want it to be. So why are we doing these conversations? We've experienced a lot of changes in the world. There are a lot of trends out there. There are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of challenges that we're facing, things that will affect us that are completely out of our control. And then they affect our future. They affect our vision for the county. So let me tell you a little bit about the basics of this project. It consists basically of two parts. One is all the research that we've been doing. We've identified a lot of trends. We've put a lot of background information onto our website. I've identified constraints and key opportunities. And we also have the input side of it, and that's where you, as members of the community, come into play. We are having the community conversations. We have an active website that we keep updating over time. We have an advisory committee, and we do briefings with our legislative bodies. All these will end up bringing us to an action plan. And that's what the process that we're going to start tonight is identifying what those actions are. And we're calling that the stepping stones to our future. Because they are a way that we can affect our future, that these actions will help to ensure that our vision is met as we move into the future. What is our vision? The county's vision is something that's not new. This was adopted last year. However, it represents a 50-year vision that the county has had. And essentially, it's that we're a thriving community. We honor our natural and cultural resources, our agricultural heritage, our rural landscape, while building a sustainable economy, promoting outstanding services and growth within defined service districts. And for those of you who are not aware, you can see on the map, that's a map of Fauquier County. We seek to focus development into those smaller colored areas known as our service districts so that we can preserve the brown areas for agriculture, open space, and land preservation. Okay, now we're on the third session. We've had the first one where we talked about our future vision. The second one we talked about the opportunities and constraints. And then again, tonight we're going to talk about ways that we can achieve the vision through defined actions. This will carry us to the next work session that will be done in November, on the 16th of November, in which we will come back and present the actions that have been collectively done in this session, as well as the ones that are on the website, and have them organized into a draft action plan that we can then share with you. And then we are seeking to have a final action plan in December. At the first meeting, what you said then, when asked, what kind of future do you want for Fauquier County, we got a number of visions, of comments from people. They were able to be condensed down into some key themes. And these key themes come out to managed growth and concentrated development, preserving our rural areas and our open spaces, creating vibrant towns and villages, expanding our businesses and employment opportunities, and then also ensuring creating a strong agricultural economy. At meeting number 2, when we started to talk about, out of those themes, what were some of the obstacles and opportunities for reaching the vision, we centered those on combining those 5 themes down into 3 themes. And this is what our focus is going to be tonight. And every time we've tried to build upon the information, the ideas that have been shared out there. And for those of you who this is your first time, the prior presentations, I think, have provided us with a wealth, or provided the community with a wealth of information about existing conditions in the county, what we are projected to see in the future, emerging trends, and there are just a whole variety of resources. You can check out the website, and there are 2 prior presentations that are there, and I want to thank Scott Harlan and his Talk 19 Media for donating their services in videotaping our presentations. So that's been very helpful. Please, if you have not had a chance, there's a wealth of information on the websites for you, and I think you'll enjoy the presentations if you've not seen them before. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about potential actions. So the question is, what are the potential actions that Fauquier County should consider in the context of the opportunities and obstacles that have been identified as a part of this vision? You will have some of those on the sheets that you were given out earlier. We're also going to talk about those obstacles and matching them with opportunities in the community. Tonight we're going to spice it up just a little bit. Instead of hearing from just one presenter, we're going to have multiple individuals giving you presentations tonight. We'll have Milt Hurd, who's going to talk to you about working assumptions, as well as the types of actions that we have in our toolbox that we can use. We have Vlad Gravilovic, who's going to talk about theme 1, which is the managing growth and concentrated development. We have Matt Renborg, who's going to talk about theme 2, which is expanding the business and employment opportunities. And then I'll come back with you and talk about rural preservation and agriculture. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Milt Hurd to talk about some working assumptions.
Well, thank you, Kimberly, and thank you all for coming out tonight again. Many of you were here at the previous 2 meetings. So, as Kimberly said, before we roll up our sleeves and get into actions, it's helpful to have a sort of a common understanding about some of the sort of drivers of change. And you know, one of the main drivers of change is population growth. So what we like to do is look at what we might call working assumptions and find some kind of common ground about what is our expectation for the pressures that will come to Fauquier County, that we'll have to face as we look ahead a couple of decades. And if we have that, then we're sort of in the same ballpark when we have our discussions about what we should do to handle that change. So population projections, we talked about them the last 2 meetings. And you know, the thing is, a lot of people might want to say, gee, in an ideal world, Fauquier County could stop its population growth or severely limit it. Unfortunately, we don't really have the legal authority to do that. But what we can do is shape the location and character of the growth. So it's useful and sort of practical to make some estimate, some realistic estimate about how much population expansion we might get. It's safe to assume that Fauquier will grow in the sense that it's located, you know, on the fringe of this major metropolitan area. If we were in Southwest Virginia, the discussion might be about population decline. But here, we can expect some growth. So what should be our expectation? For the last 2 decades, we've grown at almost 1,000 people per year, a little under 1,000 people per year. That's been a pretty consistent trend. It's brought us to just under 70,000 people. We looked at this data at the last meeting, as you recall. When we look ahead to the future, we've got 2 sort of credible forecasts of population growth. One is from the Weldon Cooper Center, which is sort of the official state estimate for localities. And that really tracks our past trend of the last couple of decades, about 1,000 people, a little under 1,000 people per year. The other is a private economic firm, Woods and Poole, who also does these kind of forecasts. Theirs is much higher, not quite twice that rate. And so we think that a working sort of conservative assumption would be that we'd be at that trend that the state thinks we will be at and that tracks what we've seen the last couple of decades. There's reasons to think it could be higher or lower than that, but that seems to be a reasonable, not overly ambitious, somewhat conservative assumption. So our question for you all is that a reasonable working assumption, knowing that it's not a plan, it's not a desire, it's not a policy, it's an estimate of what we think is likely and that we might need to prepare for. So we would sort of ask, is that a reasonable working assumption for now, knowing that it can also be tweaked, revised, refined as we go forward in time? Does that make sense to folks? And I know there's probably some who would say, well, can't we make it 0 and not, 1,000 people per year? And like I said, we really technically can't. These forces that expand our population are coming at us from the outside. They're way bigger than the county, and to some degree they're coming from the inside with natural births, neither of which we can actually stop. But like I said, we can shape it, we can guide it, and we can manage the character of it. So if that's okay, we'll use that 1,000 people per year assumption today. Keep that in the back of your mind. And again, as the process goes forward, the county can always refine that and revise it as needed as it gets new information. There's also employment growth. That's another thing that might happen. And that's usually seen as a little bit more positive because it's jobs, it's income, it adds to the economic base. And again, we think that the forecast is for roughly 1,000 jobs per year going into the future. That's a little higher than the state expectation and the national expectation because of our location here on the fringe of the metropolitan area. The employment growth, though, usually is less of a concern because, one, it directly brings in money, but it also takes up a lot less land than residential growth typically. It's a fraction of the land conversion. So usually it's not as much of a problem. And it can, in fact, be good to the extent that it might reduce out commuting and that sort of thing. So, but again, we think that 1,000 jobs a year is a reasonable assumption looking forward. And again, we can adjust it as we get new information going forward. So the challenge then is what do we need to do in light of this sort of pressure that's coming at us steadily, gradually, but sort of continuously in the coming years to achieve the county's vision, to stay on track with the vision. As Kimberly said, this is a vision the county's had for 40, 50 years. It's done a great job so far of keeping track. How do we stay on track? What kinds of things does the county have to do to continue to achieve that vision? So I want to go over some sort of categories because some of you may be very familiar with all the tools that are available, some of you might not. It doesn't really matter, if you don't have a technical action you want to offer. It can just be anything you think of that makes sense to you. But there are some sort of groupings of ideas that are sort of typical things that counties can do. Fauquier is doing many of these, starting with policy guidelines. Just the words in the comprehensive plan are foundational to guiding growth. They sort of set the stage for everything else the county does and can have an effect in and of themselves from a policy standpoint. So an action that you might think of might be to say something in the comprehensive plan about what we want, very specifically in terms of growth or preservation. Another one is regulations, and particularly the zoning ordinance. Many of you are familiar with that. It regulates the development of land, density, building heights, the types of uses that can occur, and that sort of thing. It's one of the county's primary tools for managing growth. Also, the rest of the county code, which regulates a lot of other things, and the state code. Even though the county doesn't control the state code, we can influence it indirectly through our legislators. So all those the package of all kinds of regulations that can be done to constrain or promote different kinds of activities. Then investments in infrastructure. This is another big one. The county has a budget. It makes investments through its capital improvements program for facilities, whether it's schools, parks, sometimes roads, various things, sewer and water, and the like. Those investments have a big effect on the shape and form of county's development. Then programs, typically funded on an annual basis through the budget. These are ongoing activities, often staffed by county folks. There's a whole variety of things that could be done. Some of the county is doing now. It's got an agricultural development program, for example. There might be others that you could think of that the county should undertake. And then there's a whole package of potential incentives, which can be implemented through regulations by law or through grants, sort of the carrot as opposed to the stick. And again, the county has some latitude. There might be different things that might occur to you to say, hey, we should give an incentive for a certain kind of activity that would help achieve our vision. Public and private partnerships is another category known as P3, where the county joins with a private landowner or developer or business and jointly does a project. Typically, it's in the form of some kind of infrastructure improvement. Then revenue sharing between localities. The state code, through the Voluntary Settlements Act, allows localities to join together with other localities and make arrangements or agreements about sharing revenue and then doing joint projects. It's really wide open. It's just whatever the localities agree to do, and they have to get it signed off on by the state. But it's really wide open, so there's lots of potential there between, say, a town and a county or between adjacent counties or the like. Then there's special tax districts or special service districts and community development authorities. These are tools whereby a distinct geographic area in the county says, hey, we want more stuff. We want more infrastructure improvements. We want more services, and we're willing to take a little bit of an incremental increase in our taxes if that money goes to our location. And the county can establish these, and then the taxes go up just a little bit in that place, and the money goes to specific improvements for those landowners. So it's a great tool. The county actually uses special service districts now. Community development authority is a little bit more sophisticated, but the same kind of thing. So that's another way to sort of isolate the cost and benefit of a particular improvement to a specific location. And then there's conservation easements, and that includes donations, which are commonly done by landowners on their own, but also purchase of development rights by the county and or the state. It also includes related things for open land preservation, like use value taxation, which the county has, and other programs, agriculture and forestry districts. So there's that whole basket of tools of actual land acquisition or tax abatement for farming. So those are just a few of the sort of big categories, but I want you to know that you don't have to, your ideas don't have to fit into those. They can just be stuff you think of or things you're concerned about or an idea you have. It doesn't really matter. It's okay. If it fits into those, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. So we just want, when we break into our groups and we get into this, just feel free to be creative, have at it, and get your ideas out on paper. It'll be very helpful.
Thanks, Milt. And thank you again for coming out here purposefully. And just as a reminder, you're here for a purpose, which is to brainstorm actions of how the county can achieve this vision. And in order to help you with that, we want to give you some food for thought by recapping some of the opportunities and obstacles that have been generated in the last meeting. This is not to constrain you, but hopefully give you some inspiration of what actions could be taken. And these are grouped into the three kind of categories that Kimberly went over. You'll see the tent cards on each of the tables. That's how we're going to kind of facilitate the discussion after these slides around these three themes. So the first theme is manage growth and concentrated development in vibrant towns and villages. And we found three kind of issues that led to these obstacles and opportunities. The issue of growth, the issue of providing infrastructure, and transportation choices. and just to walk through some of the obstacles and opportunities that were developed around these three issues. So one of the big ones was the capacity for growth. Folks identified an issue as an obstacle of projected growth potentially exceeding the build-out capacity of the towns and service districts. And some of the numbers, the analysis we did on this, you see on the left that the approximate additional capacity for population in the towns and service districts is 26,000 new people at the current densities for those towns and service districts. And then the 2025 year county growth projections are 24,000 to 37,000, depending on which projection you use. But you can see we're right there, we're right at the kind of projected capacity within 20-25 years. So the opportunity that was identified in this was there could be sufficient land area if you look at different kind of density approaches to accommodate extensive additional growth. And on the right, the box there says that if you develop the towns and service districts, not at their current densities, but at a density of, say, the town of the Plains, which, you know, has a dense core but has a lot of kind of lower density around the edges, you would have potential capacity for 86,000 new people in the towns and service districts. If you develop them at the density of the town of Warrenton, again, that's the whole town, including Old Town, but also some of the peripheral areas that are lower density or even vacant, you'd have enough capacity for 134,000 new people. This is not to suggest that we need to change the densities, but it is kind of, do we need to expand the service districts to just deal with the growth population? This suggests that you can accommodate extensive additional population depending on how you approach the density. And a very much related factor is what is density, what is the quality and character of this growth? So what folks had identified as a potential obstacle, you know, if the vision is to concentrate the new growth and development into these service districts so that we can preserve the rural areas and stay true to our vision, what about resistance to growth and density in the service districts? If you already live there, you're not too thrilled about having new growth or higher density there. But the opportunity that was identified was, one, the quality and character of this development, so if it's well planned, and two, if it's well timed and phased according to infrastructure improvements so that it can be accommodated in a more orderly fashion. And you can see the images on the left there. The left is actually lower density, kind of anywhere USA, versus the right is Old Town is a higher density but much more attractive form or pattern of new development. So that's an important issue when you look at the concept of growth. And just to kind of expand on this point, you know, the balance in the quality and character of new development against the quantity and density. The image on the left is kind of the old suburban sprawl subdivision of the 60s and 70s. The image on the right is new traditional neighborhood development. It's in Kentlands, which is a traditional neighborhood development outside of Gaithersburg, Maryland, which has large single-family houses. It has townhouses. It has apartments. It has preserved open space, all within the form of a traditional village development. The image on the right is actually denser than the image on the left, and it's just meant to illustrate the point that development is very much about the quality and character as well as the density and the amount. And a commercial example, again, in the image on the left, kind of the old strip development of the 60s and 70s, is actually less dense than the image on the right, which is in Old Town Purcellville, the new development of the 90s, and that is new commercial development that is meant to mimic the kind of old storefronts and the 20 to 30 foot bays that you have in those old storefronts, two-story from 100 or 150 years ago. There's actually one floor plate behind a lot of that development that is kind of maybe one user, but it was meant on the outside to mimic these 20 or 30 foot lots that you have as a traditional pattern of development. So again, those were issues related to growth. The next big issue that was identified in this theme was infrastructure capacity, particularly folks focused on water capacity. So obstacles were things like the projected demand for water supply and water treatment is greater than the existing capacity, one opportunity that was identified was gray water systems, basically reusing wastewater in a non-potable way so that it can be used for irrigation purposes, which is one of the prime water users. So in a way, conserving water can increase your capacity, your ability to handle the infrastructure. Secondly, groundwater quantity and quality. Since the county depends on groundwater for its water supply, this can be compromised, both quantity and quality, by the development that happens. So innovative stormwater techniques, like you see in the pictures there, rain gardens rather, capturing some of that rainwater and runoff and filtering it through natural techniques before it enters the streams. Fundamentally using sustainable technologies to increase your capacity and protect your supply. And then finally, travel choices were identified quite a bit as obstacles. So the limited connectivity at streets, sidewalk availability, particularly in new development in the service districts, and the limited transportation options, kind of having to rely on single occupancy vehicles, cars for everything. Opportunities included, there is an increase in state and federal funding and opportunities for transportation alternatives. And the opportunity could be the county expanding transit, sidewalks, bike lanes, and trails to capitalize on some of these funding opportunities. So those are just some examples, again, to give you food for thought for potential actions. And I'll turn it over to Matthew Renborg for the next theme.
So the next thing that we're going to be talking about is the expanding business and employment opportunities that is desired to see in the county. This issue obviously relates to many different topics, but three of the ones that we want to, again, touch on in this presentation, just to start to spur some thoughts, include the county's broadband access, workforce development, and then also looking at projected business growth rates. So this first issue that we want to touch on is broadband, or basically high-speed internet access that's available in Fauquier County. Broadband today is not only just basically a necessity for business development, but it also has this an additional element within Fauquier County in that it can allow residents here to telework either full-time or potentially 1 or 2 days a week, which makes potentially the distance from the major city centers less of an obstacle. The obstacle that we found, though, that's paired with that is the fact that broadband in Fauquier County is still relatively limited in many areas, especially the rural areas. The statistics indicate that actually a little bit less than 70% of the population of the county has access to even your basic broadband technologies. And so when we're thinking about some of these issues, some of the actions might relate to investments in technological infrastructure that the county could make, or ways to provide incentives to broadband providers to encourage them to expand coverage into some of these more rural areas. The second issue we wanted to talk about was workforce and employment. Within these discussions that we've had so far, there has been a lot of talk about the fact that the workforce skills of the county's residents aren't necessarily that closely related to the employment opportunities that are available in the county, which is creating that situation where most of the people who live in Fauquier County don't work here, and conversely, most of the people who work in Fauquier County don't live here. So when we were thinking about ways that this issue could be addressed, one of the opportunities that came up would be the county's ability to use institutions like Lord Fairfax Community College to develop job training programs so that their students could be prepared for specific positions within different businesses or organizations that are located in the county, and have that direct connection to encourage the residents to be able to work with these local businesses. And so some of the action items that you might talk about could be, if we were talking about Lord Fairfax Community College, what are the particular industries or types of positions that might benefit the most from programs like that? Or it could be, again, discussions of incentives that could draw some of these businesses from the more central areas of DC to come and be located in Fauquier County. And the final issue is related to business growth. And what this subject is dealing with is the fact that Fauquier County is positioned geographically and economically as a result, kind of on a balance between, on the one hand, Northern Virginia, which is projected to have strong economic growth as a region into the future. And then on the other hand, it's also on the edge of just kind of the state of Virginia in general, which is supposed to have slower than average business growth. And so one of the questions that we kind of want to discuss is how can Fauquier County leverage some of the strength of Northern Virginia to promote business growth within the county? And so some of the issues that might come up are how can we create actions that would take advantage of things like the county's enterprise centers, different tourism resources such as wineries or the equine events, and then even things like access to the VRE, and that's not in the county but nearby, and different ways to kind of strengthen and enhance the connections that the county has economically with Northern Virginia.
I'm going to talk about the rural and open space preservation and a strong agricultural economy. There are three issues that I'm going to touch on that have been raised, and that's the first is development pressures, pressure on the rural areas, the local food movement, increased interest in it, as well as limitations that we have, and then agricultural infrastructure. Under development pressures, we are experiencing, high amount of development pressure coming out of Northern Virginia, pressure for residential growth, and as a result of that, and we also have some increased pressure for commercial development within our rural areas. And what that does is it tends to push up the values of the property. So we are experiencing higher than average values for our farmland, which makes it much more difficult to have new farmers come in. And then in terms of opportunities, when we talk about the amount of pressure that we have coming in from Northern Virginia, we have a lot of good existing regulations and systems in place to help guide us in that way. The question is, do we need to have some additional actions that help to improve what we have there and come up with some new ideas for actions. And we also have a really high, we have a good proximity to a broad food market that is interested in local foods. And, we've seen new businesses that are coming in that are targeting themselves into the Northern Virginia market. And that's something that's an opportunity that we might be able to build on there as well. Again, it's the local foods. We have some limited food production, but we have a growing interest in local fauds in our area, but we do have limited access to these local markets to carry our food outside of Fauquier County. But on the upside is we have some existing systems in place. We have some existing agricultural organizations that could be drawn upon, built upon, expanded in order to help overcome some of the obstacles that we have. You can see today that we've got annual food expenditures in the area that have, in the whole region, now this is the Rappahannock region, is over $400 million in 2012, and we're really seeing that a high percentage of our food is grown out of the region. So it is something that we can start to focus on, how can we keep our food in the region? An obstacle that we're experiencing right now, too, is that our farms are not profit-making. The average income for farming is a net loss. And the third area that is a large issue is agricultural infrastructure. Currently, we produce, but we have very little value-added product. That our raw product goes out and is processed elsewhere. It's turned into another product elsewhere, and then those things are then brought back into the community. And so if we could start to look for, maybe the actions is, how can we bring back in infrastructure that will help us be able to process more of our products here and leave the value-added component or the value-added dollars back in the community. So again, we're going to be talking about what actions that we should consider in the context of these opportunities. Now, I don't think we should be bound by necessarily these opportunities that were presented. I'm sure that there are other ones that you can think of, but we want to come up with actions in the context of what those obstacles and opportunities may be.
Just a couple more final points, and we'll turn it over to you all, let you get to work. First of all, an example, maybe, of an action that fits into these obstacles and opportunities, just to give you sort of an idea what you might consider. In order to achieve managed growth, concentrated development in vibrant towns and villages, that's the vision theme, Fauquier County should amend its comprehensive plan in such a way as to ensure a phasing schedule for infrastructure improvements tied to population growth rates. That's an example of an action. It doesn't have to be that detailed or even that sophisticated, but that deals with the potential resistance to growth and density in the service area. It deals with the opportunity to have well-planned and phased infrastructure in those locations like Vlad mentioned. And we've also had some ideas from the survey that's been on the web. We've got some responses from that, and there's some examples there. Initiate a coordinated and targeted employment plan for job growth. Provide tax breaks for active farmers. Some of that's done through use value, but there could be more. Promote local agricultural products within a targeted regional marketing program. So those are things that people have talked about and that we'll sort of put into the mix here, and you might have other ideas as well. Note that, and Kimberly will touch on this when we close later in the evening, but after tonight, look for the survey. It'll be posted on the web October 1st. And there'll be an exercise to prioritize actions. We'll be doing some of that tonight with the ideas you come up with, but there'll be a more robust one on the web. And then mark your calendars for November 16th, which will be the final community conversation meeting here to look at the draft action plan that we put together based upon all this input from y'all. And note the project website. And I think there's some little cards or handout sheets there you can take back with you that have the website on it. So please do visit that.